So honoured to talk about the project that's currently doing with Shama Rahman on Neuro Art, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, impossible to top these three fantastic presentations. Yeah, thank you so much to the three speakers before me. I will introduce this paper that I've written together with Shama Rahman. Shama is unfortunately not here today. She's in Israel. She wanted to join, but unfortunately can't make it. So I will take over her part. So please be a bit patient with me. Should I, need to branch out a little bit. So you have met me before yesterday. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a researcher, an artist, also recently an educator. So I'm a teacher at Rahman University and Greenwich University and Bournemouth University a bit. My practice is in visual sound art. I'm really interested in both the phenomena of presence. I've been working for 15 years with holograms and holographic projections, also a lot with light art. And recently I'm very interested in participatory art forms and what shape they can take post-COVID. And we can talk about that a bit more through this presentation. And my colleague Shama, I want to introduce her as well because she's a fundamental part of this paper and also the project that I will talk about. She is also a multidisciplinary artist, a scientist, neuroscientist, a musician, a polymath, and she's founder of the startup Neuro Art that is really leading in this discussion around AI and creativity. And this startup is also involved in the project that we'll talk about today, Zeitgeist, which you can also see outside as part of the Art and Flux exhibition. Shama and I recently formed a new studio called IO Studio, and IO is really looking at this intersection between art, science, and creativity. And we're working on several different projects. Zeitgeist is one of them, and this paper is actually also part of our development. So specifically, we're interested in a lot of these questions around neuroaesthetics, neuroculture, neuroart, and new types of creative interfaces in an online context, but also in a physical context. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the past. So the paper basically looks at the history of neuro art and tries to understand whether there are different waves within the history of neuro arts. And it feels that there's a new emergence of neuro artists, artists working with brainwave interfaces and human-computer interfaces, but also like there are different episodes, different phases, different eras almost when we look back at the history. And so together, Shama and I try to unearth a little bit what these currents are, and also going back all the way into the past. So you might all be familiar with the early experiments by Luigi Galvani. Luciana Hale, actually an artist that I'll be talking about a bit, she published quite a bit on this as well. And so Luigi Galvani was one of the first to really understand bioelectricity, and he used frog legs and electricity and established this link between our motosensoric apparatus and electricity, right? So if you run currents through the frog legs, they branch out. And famously, Richard Caton in the United Kingdom, he continued some of these experiments in the 1870s. And so he was actually one of the first ones to prove this idea of bioelectricity. And Hans Berger, who is the founder of the EEG, he actually recognized this important role that Richard Caton, a Liverpudlian, had in this context. But the term neuroscience is quite young, actually. It only dates back to the 1960s, so to 1962, founded at MIT by Francis O. Schmidt. And there was actually a program, the Neuroscience Research Program, that coined this term in the early 60s. And neuro art goes back to around about that same time. So Ivan Lucier's Music for a Solo Performer is now a modern day classic. So he was really one of the first artists that can be credited with using EEGs, using brainwave interfaces to create sounds. In his case, it was really one of the first examples of neurofeedback as well, right? Where his brainwaves were used as part of the performance too. Luciana Hale, who I just mentioned, she recently discovered that apparently Dr. William Gray Walter also worked on these early representations of brainwaves, both through sound and also in visual form. William Grey-Walter is famous for his work with EEG, so he really built on the work that Hans Berger did in developing EEGs as a scientific method, but he also
In a
is
simple
for,
villa on the outskirts of Bristol,
remember this characterized in the early 60s.
driving
So absolutely
exterior
fantastic work.
takes
So he
avoiding.
created cerebral music, but also his toposcope, which was basically visualizing for the first time brainwaves. So this at the end of the 60s, we see a bit of a shift from purely sound focused projects to projects that were actually taking visual representations of brainwaves on board. One more piece from the early 60s, Richard Teitelbaum. He performed just after Alvin Lucier in the in 1968, his piece In Tune, which was performed in Italy, and that is also known as one of the very first brainwave pieces, where he was working with alpha waves and sonifying in real time. You can hear this. Before we're moving on, in the early 70s, Manfred L Eaton is an interesting artist to mention, because he was not just interested in brainwaves as a creative tool, as a tool for creative impression, but also for manipulation. So he was specifically interested in this idea of neurofeedback and biofeedback, and how we can use music for entrainment purposes, right? So to induce specific feelings or to induce specific emotions in the audience. And his practice-based research was actually funded by the Ministry of Defense. So there was definitely an ulterior motive there in his practice. Again, Manfred Eaton was working with alpha waves to basically work directly with the audience, even though, he definitely had a second agenda. So in the 70s, we see a first real interest in visual representations of brainwaves in the arts. And so here, one of the artists that stands out is Nina Sobel. Her interactive brainwave drawings, really interesting. So they basically not just visualize brainwave activity, but they also really exemplify this idea of synchronicity and how you can create an interactive performance between more than one person, and you can utilize brainwaves to show this idea of social connectedness and interrelation between performer and also audience. So these are actually beautiful pieces, and you can see here the image on the left, this is her work. When there's a sense of synchronicity between brainwaves, these brainwaves start to form a circle. So for me, it was really interesting to find this, because this is actually very much at the core of what Shama and I are working on right now, this idea of social connectedness and how you can use brainwave visualization to show when audience members feel in tune with each other. But so the 70s were also characterized by a lot of self-portraits that were using the brain, also because of this idea that the brain is universal. It's something that almost looks the same through all cultures. And so this idea was something that Annie Leibovitz and Laurie Anderson picked up on for this famous picture that you can see here at the bottom. But this is part of a whole wave of artists that worked with this concept. Also at the same time, there was a general public interest in this idea of technology, perception, this intersection between what it means to be human and what role technology can play in this context. Not at least here at the Computer Art Society with the Event 1 exhibition, and also Cybernetic Serendipity curated by Jascha Reichert at the ICA in 1968. And although there were no brainwave pieces as such included in this exhibition, there were two pieces that were illustrating the complexity of the human brain. Roland Emmett here that you can see on the left, which is a sculpture that shows the complexity of the building blocks of the human brain and plays a bit on this idea of neuroplasticity and this many different functionalities that the brain has. And also Christopher Evans' cybernetic introspective pattern classifier, CIPC, that was burning images on the inside of the retina And then audience members could see that when they closed their eyes. So it was giving them an idea of how the perceptual system works. So these were examples. And then obviously Gustav Metzger, who was a very important member of the Computer Art Society. And he, actually Nick Lambert knows much more about this than I do. And it's through you that I learned about his work. And he conceptualized some of these ideas very early on, isn't it? And then in 2012, with the help of London Fieldworks and funded by the Arts Council, this art piece was produced, Null Object, Gustav Metzger Thinks About Nothing, which is using Gustav Metzger's brainwaves to then create a 3D printed artifact of this idea of thinking about nothing. I've recently seen Gustav Metzger's work as well at the Barbican exhibition. It was just absolutely fantastic and stunning. This idea of having exhibitions that really focus on this intersection between art and brain, art and consciousness, kept a little bit, was a little bit dormant for decades. And it was not until the 1990s that it was picked up on by Hans-Ulrich Obrist, who is now one of the, he's the lead curator actually at the Serpentine for many years now. And him together with Ernst Pappel, they curated this exhibition, Art and Brain. And here in the UK, it was a bit later that the exhibition happened at the Wellcome Collection, Art with the Brain in Mind. And so these are two examples of mainstream institutions picking up this larger theme. But it's still feels like a lot of the artistic work remained quite representational at the time. So showing, representing the complexities of the human brain. This is Craig Dunn's fantastic work. He's one of the leading artists on brainwave visualization and shows some of these ideas of the power of the human brain. But to a degree, some of these art pieces were focusing on representations rather than interactions. And it feels like now, over the last 15, 20 years, we've seen a new emergence of interactive artwork that focus also on the audience and break up this dialectic a little bit between artist and audience. These are two more examples from Vanessa Lanou at Cooper Lab and Han Theon at the Marshall Lab, beautiful examples of visualizations of brainwave activity. Now I want to talk a little bit more about this kind of new wave of participatory neuro arts. I should say there's lots of different terminologies that are circling around between neuro arts, brainwave arts, neuro art, and there's no right or wrong. There's obviously a lot of theorists are writing about the subject. Peter Niehold in the Netherlands is one of the authors that published the most, maybe. But I do feel that this area of participatory neuro art is maybe something that is a new subgenre that we're witnessing currently. And I mentioned Luciana Hale before. She's also an artist that has been showing in the vicinity of the Computer Art Society quite a bit, with Connecticut and in other places. And she's artist in residence at Brighton University, and she's been working not specifically with just with brainwave art, but generally speaking with this idea of consciousness, dream states, inducing dream states into audience members. And what I really enjoy about her work is this idea of facilitation, that she is really very hands-on in making sure her audience participants, they understand what they're doing, so that they feel really part of the experience and they learn something through it too. Another artist who worked very early on in a performative way is Janine Anthony. She basically has this incredible performance where she is recording her brainwave patterns during her sleep, and then she's weaving it into a blanket that she's then covering herself with. And the audience is not directly part of it, but they are obviously part of her daytime experience, kind of influencing her dream states. So this goes all the way back to 1993. A couple of other artists, some of which I had the pleasure to work with, Rain Ashcroft. She used to be the head of BBC Science, and then did a PhD focusing also on neuro art. And this was one of the outcomes, this Tinkerbell dress, that is visualizing her emotions in real time. Yeah, it becomes a real-time interface to the audience. So yeah, it responds to her interactions and responds to her state of mind. Eiste created this helmet that is basically displaying binaural beats. So it's a meditation helmet that is passed around for audience members to meditate and immerse themselves. Another artist that stands out in this context of audience participation is Marina Abramovic. Her artwork, The Artist's Presence, is maybe one of the most important artworks of the last 30 years, one might say. She adapted this together with her Marina Abramovic Institute, the MIA, to create this piece called Measuring the Presence of the Artist's Gaze, which was also visualizing her brainwave activity in real time, and so also the response to her own presence in audience members. So a very interesting piece. And now we're moving a bit more into the here and now, and then I'll talk very briefly about our own practice with Shama. So Refik Anador is one of the more outstanding artists really. So he just won the Lumen Gold Award 2 years ago. His work, this particular work called Mapping Memories, is using beta and theta channels. And basically what he's doing is he's visualizing long-term memories, and he's mapping EEG data, actually quite complex EEG data mapped with 32 different nodes onto these spectral height maps. So these particles are basically responding to brainwave patterns, and you see kind of some of these high dimensional layers and visual patterns emerge as this, it's a recording in this case, but as this unfolds. So really fascinating work. And now a bit about the projects that led to the development that Shama and I are working on now. I should say Shama Rahman's background is also really, not just as a neuroscientist, but also there's a strong focus on participatory art, and also this idea of an interconnection with theater and performance. So she set up a company called Dracula Productions that became a little bit of a forum for artistic discourse. And as part of that, she created a theater play at Rich Mix back in 2015 that then became part of the British Science Festival. And here she was working on the themes of lost dementia and Alzheimer's. And the idea was basically to invoke false memories in audience members. So to give audience members the idea of what it feels like to suffer from dementia. And it's really interesting also in the context of Jonas' talk just now, this idea of kind of planting something. And another project that Shama worked on just recently, so IVOS was shown at the VNA and the Polymath Festival. And this is a real-time sonic performance where she is performing to a visualization of her own brainwaves in real time with this project IVOS. It's actually a very simple setup in the way that it works technically, but very effective in showing this idea of neurofeedback. So how looking back at your own brainwave can really influence the way that you then perform, right? So this feedback loop and this idea of entrainment is really interesting. My own practice, I've been working with this idea of real-time visualization of brainwaves also for quite some time. So I think the first time in 2015, also at Connecticut, with a project called Aura that was part of my own PhD research. And this particular project, Aura, was still focused a bit on this idea of presence. And then I moved on towards more audience participation focused artworks. Memoria was a response to the Grenfell fire. I'm working very closely with the community there. My studio is basically at the bottom of the Grenfell Tower. So this piece was a kind of a response. We had an exhibition 2 weeks after the fire happened and needed to respond to it. And so this artwork is basically an interface for shared commemoration. It's very subtle. So it's and it's basically an invitation to remember. And the crack, which I showed at the Event 2 exhibition with EVA London and Computer Art Society. And yeah, the crack is working on the idea of pollution, air pollution specifically, and it's a take on this idea that concrete is just one of the key polluters on the planet, and we can subvert the role of concrete a little bit. We're breaking up concrete structures. Concrete then becomes an absorbent of some of the pollutants in the air. And so this EG piece is basically an invitation to gamify and to create cracks in the wall through concentration. It's a very playful piece that we developed also. It's at Maxilla Studios in Notting Hill. Yeah, and so now about the project that Shama and I developed and that is on display here. So Zeitgeist is a brainwave interface for flow. So flow are states of heightened creativity, a concept that has been developed by Csikszentmihalyi that has been around for about 30 years. And these brainwave states, so flow states, can be measured. Shama's own PhD focused quite a bit on measuring, identifying these brainwave patterns. And she then developed an algorithm that basically allows you to understand how likely it is that you are in flow. And so this propensity of being in flow is something that we're then mapping onto visual forms, in our case, on a holographic display. The project has had various different iterations. We first presented it here at EVA and at the with BCS actually back in 2019. It was then shown at the Reclaimed exhibition at Pool Museum, and it's on display at the Hasselblattner Institute. We also showed it at Ars Electronica, and now finally here at the Accessible Areas exhibition. So these are recorded brainwaves of during lockdown when Shama was in Berlin and I was here, and we were interacting with each other on the creation on the artwork. We measured these brainwaves and then are mapping them onto this sculpture. But the idea was to create an interface for audience members to be creative with one another. So to basically interact and see in real time whether or not they're in flow. And the way it works is we've got these two intersecting Möbius strips, and we're mapping complexity. And so you see the complexities of the strips is changing, but also colors onto these Möbius strips, right? So the colors are changing, and it's actually very intuitive to understand whether you're in flow or not. And with that, we're basically providing an invitation for participants to be creative together. And so this idea was something that we've developed. We knew it was working technically, but we didn't have the time to properly test it because of COVID initially. And it was not until really earlier this year that Shama is still officially based in Berlin. So it was quite difficult to arrange that. And we finally had our very first installation at Somerset House in May. And yeah, so what we want to achieve is to arrive at an online interface that can be used from anywhere in the world, really. And this is part of the research that we're doing with the NHS and other stakeholders. And I'll talk just briefly about that in a bit. But what we've done so far is we have created these workshops that were basically user studies where we're conducting interviews with audience members and also surveys on these type of interactions. It is with waving, for instance, and actually you see the artwork in action. I will, if we have time, I would like to open the catchphrase to show you how it works under the hood. So the idea is that this is a Shama, we're facilitating in black between two people. In this case, they are humming, and they see their own brainwave states mapped onto the hologram in real time. So the darker colors are when you're less in flow, the brighter colors are when you're more in flow, and you basically know which ones of these Möbius strips corresponds to you. So it's quite intuitive using this AI algorithm that Shama created as part of her PhD research. And we then followed this up with, so we had pre-surveys and post-surveys, and questionnaires before and after to understand what this does. And there were a lot of interesting insights that we gained from this. What is really interesting is that we're not all the same. Some people find it much easier to get into flow. Also, we understood that flow is very fundamentally different to concentration, right? It's something that is really connected to being creative, and being creative often is linked to also enjoying the experience rather than just focusing and just finding it challenging. So it seems to be a little bit of a healthy in-between between something that is still challenging, but also something that's fun to do. And when we actually saw this, right? So when the two participants enjoyed being in the moment together, being creative together, being through sound, being through what plays, there were spikes in the holograms. So you could really see how they were responding to it. And yeah, also people who know how to meditate, they find it a lot easier together. Yeah, so just to summarize, and if I have time, I'll show you a bit the patch. If there's time, if not,
perhaps we can do that just after the talk ends. We can then have people can come and see.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. So looking at the past, there's a lot of different strands. There's obviously a focus on neuro sound art in the 60s. This idea of neuro portraits that was really relevant in the 70s. Large exhibitions coming to the fore in the 90s, and this idea of a neuroculture, a new emerging neuroculture in the noughties. And we do seem to see a bit of a new subgenre emerging, this idea of participatory neuro art that shifts the focus towards audience participation. And this project is now part of the Participate research project that was just awarded HRC funding with lots of different partners. Yeah, we've got Cornell University, the NHS, RNIB, the Noise Abatement Society, National Gallery is involved. So the idea is here to create various different online interfaces that measure how these interfaces can contribute to social connectedness post-COVID. So this idea of during COVID, there was a lot of sensory deprivation, a sense of disconnect between people, and how can we create online interfaces that are both meaningful, but also understand best practices around design and facilitation of these interfaces. And so Zeitgeist is one of these 4 case studies that we're developing with these partners.
Oliver, thank you very much. So we've got 10 minutes for a break, but if you'd like to see the system in action, Oliver will demo the patch as well. Thank you. Beginning of the next session.